So what we're going to do is we're here to expose it, let people tell their story, and let everybody in the public see the horrors of the court system in Suffolk County, New York.
Long Island Backstory. Long Island's news alternative to the Newsday Cablevision news monopoly. With Chief Correspondent Gary Jacobs.
Hi, I'm Gary Jacobs, and welcome to another edition of Long Island Backstory, where we're filming at the Cablevision Studios in Hauppauge, New York. My guest today is New York State Assemblyman Michael Fitzpatrick. Assemblyman Fitzpatrick is really one of the good guys. Whether you agree with him politically, you agree with some of the things, all the things, one thing that nobody could say about Mr. Fitzpatrick is that he's not an honest guy, he's very caring, and he takes his job very seriously. I know one of the things that bothers me about politicians is that there's this political class where they sort of feel like they're removed from everybody else, and a lot of times people will try to advocate for things that they believe in or want to discuss, and they'll try to get into their representative's office, and it's hard to get into them, or they'll give you an aide. And another thing that really bothers me is when people drive up to Albany, and from Long Island, it's a long schlep to get up there. You spend 4 hours to get up there, 4 hours back, and you get there, and they give you a 20-year-old aide to just placate you. And you know what? Anytime we've gone up to Albany, whether somebody's in your district or not, you've always met with them, whether it's an issue that you're interested in, and I really respect that. And I know I've brought up people to Albany and said, hey, we'll stop by my assemblyman's office, and your door is always open, and we've left with people that have had other districts and they can't even get in, and you spend a lot of time, if nothing else, explaining how things work up in Albany, which we don't know how things work. You know, we're lay people, and that's something that I really do appreciate that you do. So welcome to the show, Assemblyman.
Thank you.
You mentioned the state mandates before, and I was reading actually on your website. One of the things that I thought was interesting, it said, according to the information from the New York State Association of Counties, NYS, just 9 unfunded state mandates have serious implications on local government. These 9 mandates cost taxpayers more than $12 billion annually, and those mandates alone consume roughly 99% of local property taxes collected. Well, if that's true, what can we do with the other 1%?
Medicaid is a significant portion of that. That's a county. 50% of that cost is picked up by the federal government, 25% by the state, and 25% what's called a local share. That's the county. Nursing home costs have a 10% county share, local share. So that is a significant bottomless pit, if you will. And what they've done a couple of years ago, the state picked up the new growth in Medicaid expansion is picked up by the state. But that still comes out of the taxpayers' pockets. So we have I think it's New York and North Carolina offer the most ancillary services beyond the base federal program. So there's the minimum level of benefits that have to be offered across the country in all 50 states. But New York and North Carolina offer a lot of the ancillary benefits. And that's where a lot of the waste, fraud, and abuse is. So there has to be a serious effort, and I don't think there has been. Occasionally we see the big bust of some of the Medicaid fraud, but I think you have to tighten up some of these eligibility rules. The other thing too, when you have this influx of immigrants that are coming in, whether they be the unaccompanied minors or just the illegal immigrants, once they're in, they're getting benefits. They're getting educated, K-12 by the taxpayers. If they break their arm, they go to any emergency room, they are cared for. That comes out of the charity pool. And now you have this, and if they get through K-12 education, they're given in-state tuition if they want to go to Suffolk Community College, or any SUNY school. They're given in-state tuition rates. So this all costs money.
But if there's only 1% left, then really it needs to be done in Albany. It seems like to me, I'm putting a lot of blame on local government, county government, but it's really more, if it's 99%,
the state is most of it, absolutely.
That's really where the issue is.
The state is there. Where the counties need to do a better job, quite frankly, is they need to drive a better bargain when they negotiate these contracts. But they're under the same pressure from the unions. They want the union support, from the PBA, et cetera. And then you do have, on some of these school contracts, the school boards, and this is something that you're seeing a much more aggressive effort by the teachers union to get their people on these school boards around the state, where they're going to have their people negotiating,
Their
own contracts.
right.
And, so whose interests are being served, the taxpayer? Or, there was a recent controversy about, it was in the state of New Jersey, how an executive of the New Jersey Education Association, their version of the New York State United Teachers, was forced off a local school board because, quite bottom line, it's the fox guarding the hen house.
Right.
And you can't have that. There's an inherent conflict of interest there. So it's a problem. It's a problem.
Another thing I want to talk about is the heroin problem.
Yeah.
And I know you were on one of the task force up in
Right.
Albany. But so on one hand, you're saying, hey, we can't keep spending government money. Is this something that we should spend more government money on?
Well, there is this is a huge, this is where an issue with international and national roots has a direct impact on each one of us as not only as local taxpayers, but as parents. The heroin problem is everywhere. It's not just suburban Long Island, it's New Hampshire, it's Alaska, it's everywhere. The Narcan, which is the antidote to these heroin overdoses, we're seeing, we're expanding that usage, allowing more people to give it out. But it's not a panacea. What it does is it stops that particular overdose. At the end of the day, you still have a heroin addict. They're going to go for the next hit once this wears off, thanks to the Narcan. So it's only it relieves the symptom. It doesn't, treat the disease, so to speak. We have to move toward more treatment. The public safety people have said, we can't arrest our way out of this. We can't put, just continuing to put people in jail. The drug dealers, yes, you've got to continue to go aggressively after them. You've got to stop the flow of those drugs. This is where this controversy along the border is so important, because a lot of that heroin and a lot of this meth and all of this, these other substances are coming up from the south through these drug cartels. That's why this border security has become such a hot issue this year in the presidential campaign. But you've got to have expanded treatment. There's always been a tug of war between the people who need the treatment and the insurance companies. The insurance companies have to be required to cover more of this. That will be an extra expense. But if we can use market forces to try and keep costs down as low as possible, but you have to provide the necessary treatment if we're going to get out of this. And one of the problems, Gary, is the quality of these substances, whether it be marijuana to the heroin, is of very high quality. It takes a very little bit to get hooked. And that's why stopping the influx of this is so important. But it also is going to require education at a younger age. It's bad enough these kids have to, are going into a very competitive work environment and job climate, but now you've got to educate them at an earlier age about the dangers of drugs. We also have to get better cooperation and, in fact, maybe come down a little heavier sometimes on the medical profession, because one of the universal complaints is that you go in, I just had surgery on my throat. I was in a hell of a lot of pain for the first, couple of weeks, and yet they gave me, I took it for about 3 days because I absolutely needed it, but I couldn't wait to get off it because I'm scared to death of getting hooked on it.
Right.
Now, if I'm worried about that, and I endured more pain than I wanted to because I just didn't want, after 2 or 3 days, I just did not want to run this risk and perhaps get hooked on this stuff. So we have to have a more coordinated effort. And there are steps being taken now between the district attorneys, between the medical profession, the medical society. There are conversations being had as we speak to better coordinate this. And the doctors, and when we meet with the medical society, and their offices are just down the road here, we meet with them twice a year to have these conversations. And that has been an intense conversation we've had with them for the past couple of years, on this. So we are moving in the right direction. It is going to take time, but getting the treatment, that's very, very important, and educating the kids at an earlier age. Unfortunately, this isn't the 1950s anymore. This isn't Ozzie and Harriet or My Three Sons, the way we grew up. It's a much different world today, and you've got to get to the kids at an earlier age. They grow up so much more quickly today than we ever did.
You can't take a chance that you missed that opportunity.
You can't.
Because it's
You
too
can't.
late.
Right.
One of the, I sit around the table and we talk about the taxes and we all complain about the taxes. One thing that always comes up is everybody says, well, it's all the schools and we want good schools, so there's nothing we can do about it. That's one of the, you live on Long Island, you pay for the schools.
Right.
How much of this is the schools and how much of it is everything else, whether it's the police, the corruption, the wasteful spending, the patronage jobs?
Well, the patronage is clearly a problem at a number of levels of government, not in, not in even in the schools as well. Look, 70% of your tax bill is the schools. Yes, funding education is the number one responsibility of the state government. We take it very seriously, and we're in fact, in this year's budget, one of the goals is to eliminate the gap elimination adjustment, which is one of the tools that former Governor Spitzer used to cut school funding after the financial crisis. So we're trying to build that back. But one thing that's undeniable, Gary, is that the growth of the labor costs, the pension costs, the healthcare costs has to be addressed. We have a declining population of school children, but we still have growing costs. We are spending over $22,000 per student on average. That is far, far too high.
What about people, we pay to educate them, and then they leave?
Right, because there's no
So
place.
a lot of that. We spend this money, great kids, and they leave the island.
You don't have jobs, you don't have the housing options
Right.
for them, and you have the high costs. As I said earlier in the broadcast, I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to start having a conversation about consolidating, if not district boundaries, certainly district administration. We have to lower our costs. It's not going to be a pleasant conversation for those involved because some people win and some, well, I shouldn't say win, but some people have to lose in this. And whether you do it by the least unpleasant method, the least unpleasant method you can, whether it's through attrition. But if you don't do something, and something has to be done, if our tax base is not expanding and our costs continue to grow and we have a declining number of kids to educate, something has to give. And restructuring how we pay and operate our school districts is one of those. It's also going to happen in government as well. Do we need OTB? I don't believe we do. That should be cut. Do we need all these patronage jobs? No. One of the ways I think you get to the heart of the patronage problem, and I've had a bill in to do this as soon as I got to Albany, you've got to remove the defined benefit pension. You have to take it away from every elected official and every non-civil service.
How does it help, you're saying, because those jobs won't be so desirable anymore?
Well, you've got to, it's one of the reasons, the defined benefit pension, that traditional pension model, is the single root cause. It's the mustard seed, in my opinion, for the political culture that we have created here, not just on Long Island, but in other states as well.
We certainly created here on Long Island.
And it's one of the worst here on Long Island. It's one of the reasons why government grew at the rate it did, adding jobs. It's one of the reasons why, even when you implement term limits, as we have in Suffolk County government, where the administrative jobs are 12 years, 3 4-year terms, 12 years for the legislators, 6 2-year terms. How many of those legislators, once they leave, where do they go?
They go to another
They
job.
go to another job.
Right.
Or if it's not an elected job, they go to the Water Authority or OTB at a higher rate of pay. And voters think, oh, we've solved the problem. They're out of government. No, they're not they're out of elected office. They're still in government at a higher rate of pay, earning a bigger pension that you're going to pay for.
Right.
Okay? And that's what has to stop. There's no reason why any elected official or non-civil service appointed should be in a traditional defined benefit pension.
But who's going to vote against it? You're asking the people who are getting it to vote against it.
But I'm asking the voters, and I'm talking to people everywhere I go, whether it's a civic meeting or a debate. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the problem. How do we solve the problem? This is how we solve the problem. Other states, Gary, have done this. Michigan, Alaska, Utah. Elected officials in Utah, when you're elected, if you're hired as a public sector worker in the state of Utah, you're given a choice: the traditional plan, which is less generous than it used to be, or a defined contribution, the 401k style. But if you're a newly elected official, you only have one choice, the defined contribution. You're not allowed in the traditional system.
I'm sure they're still filling those jobs.
The problem with the traditional defined benefit system incentivizes longevity. You're encouraged to stay as long as you can, because the longer you're there, the better your benefit will be. So that creates a culture, it creates a pattern of behavior, and where is my incentive as an elected official if I'm in a traditional defined benefit pension and I want to get to 20 years or 30 years? Where is my incentive to say no to any interest group, especially the big ones,
Who's got the money to keep
who may have the ability to knock me out of office? Where is my incentive to say no to them? It's gone. There is no incentive. And that's why we are in the mess we are in today. The absolute root cause is the defined benefit pension and the culture it has created, and it has mushroomed and snowballed for decades to the point now where Suffolk and Nassau County have over $500 million, 300 Suffolk, 200 for Nassau, basically on the credit card to pay their current obligations into the fund. They can't afford it without driving the tax rate through the roof. That tells you something needs to be changed, restructured. It's all about restructuring every level of government, but we have to change how we operate government. If we don't, more people will leave, more companies will leave, and we will collapse, and you will see Detroit happen here on Long Island. What happened in some of our major cities, New York in the 70s, Detroit now, and others, can and will happen in Suffolk and Nassau counties.
Now, you spoke on some of the one-shot deals to get us out of it, and I think this is one of these deals, the red light cameras. What's your thought on the red light?
We had two bills for that, two programs. The first time I voted no, because I don't like them. The second time I voted yes.
This is state, which is different than...
This is for the county.
This is
for the county, because I do believe they can be abused, but I have seen the video, and I do think in certain intersections they do provide a safety. There's a safety element. I was amazed when former County Executive Steve Levy invited the state delegation. He made a pitch for his county agenda, and said, "Look, here's some of the footage to show you what we're trying to stop. School buses going through red lights, assuming they're empty. Oil trucks by like a second or two. Now that doesn't seem like a long time. At an intersection, it's a long time. Right. T-bone collisions where people have been seriously hurt. So in certain intersections, I think it can be effective, but they're very unpopular. They have been rescinded in other areas. I'm not a fan, but I was convinced that the safety element at certain intersections is worth trying. But as a tool, no, I'm not a fan. I will never
carried away. Now it's not about safety at all
any
anymore.
Attempt to expand them, I will vigorously oppose. Okay. So they cannot be used as a revenue generator, and that's why the speed cameras were roundly rejected. They wanted to push the speed cameras, and that was rejected as well. And that's nothing more than a revenue generator. In fact, in Nassau, they weren't even putting up warning signs to get people. Right. And 20 miles an hour. Government will end up doing things like this to generate revenue because they simply don't want to, swim upstream, if you will, and have the conversation with interest groups that you have to have, and they don't want to have.
I mean, I think it's about safety. Most people would agree. But to me, it's been abused, and then now there's allegations of shortening yellow lights and putting them in intersections.
Well, that's easy. That's easy to check, and you always hear that sort of thing, and that's easy to look at and check. But and I don't believe that's happening here in Suffolk County. But the overwhelming majority of these red light tickets are people who don't make the right on red is the biggest problem. And that, as one of my friends who's a retired Suffolk officer, he says, no cop will ever give you a ticket for that. So it's the safety aspect of running reds. I think it can be very helpful. But if you're just nailing people for making right on red, I mean, how many times have we been to an intersection, especially early in the morning?
Not a car in sight.
Not a car in sight. You make one of those rolling stops. We've all done it. Right. And but when there's 1 o'clock in the morning, you're coming home and there's no one around. You make the rolling stop. You may not come to a complete full stop, but look, we're all intelligent people. We know
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, well, I'm against them, so.
Yeah,
But like you said,
and
I
I'm
think
not
for
a fan
security,
either.
And the people who say it's all about security are just kidding themselves, because there's no discretion in them.
No, there is. It's more about revenue, but there is a security component that is very real, and it's undeniable. And that's why I voted for it the second time, because I know in certain intersections, I feel better having it there, because people will run those reds and people can get seriously hurt. But if any expansion, I will vigorously oppose. We have no more.
That's good to know. What about the last subject, minimum wage? What do you think about increasing that? I mean, on Long Island, if you're getting a minimum wage, you can't live.
Well, you can't live, but the minimum wage was never designed to be a living wage. It was always a training wage, and I think this one issue, the minimum wage, has become very politicized. It's become a political football. The governor has made it a signature issue with him, and I think it is a serious mistake. In fact, the governor's father, Mario Cuomo, implemented in New York State the Earned Income Tax Credit. That was his response to the calls to raise the minimum wage back then. If we utilize the earned income, enhance that, because who pays for that? You want the wealthy to pay? That's one of the ways they help fund that Earned Income Tax Credit. What this effort is, Gary, is a very hard and aggressive push by the major labor unions to raise this. And one of the reasons why they like raising the minimum wage is because there are many, many contracts that have a provision that if the minimum wage is raised, it automatically opens up the contract and everybody else gets a raise. Now, I'm all for seeing wages increase, but not by government saying you're going to pay more. What's going to happen here, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others and many economists, is that if you raise the minimum wage, you're raising the cost of labor. And when you raise the cost of something, no matter what it is, including labor, you buy less of it. And what happens, and this is already happening in places like France, where McDonald's is rolling out technology where you can order your burger and fries on an iPad, and it's happening around the country now. Jobs were lost in Seattle, out in the state of Washington, because they raised it to $15, and the same thing is going to happen here. It will have a devastating impact on business in upstate New York, maybe somewhat less of an impact down here, but it will cost young people jobs, and that's the problem. And it's going to accelerate the trend toward automation, and that is, if you can do your banking, as most of us do today, at an ATM, and deposit a check and take money out just by hitting a couple of buttons, you can certainly order a burger and fries doing the same thing. So that's what is going to happen. And then who wins and who loses? All right? Businesses have to maintain their profit margins. You can't charge $10 for a Happy Meal. People aren't going to pay that. So what happens? You will see further mechanization, further automation, whether it's at the counter or even back in the kitchen. And because you have the ability now through technology to lower those labor costs. And then where do people work? When I was a kid, my first job was delivering Newsday as a Newsday boy. After school, I had 55 papers. Right. All right? I put them in my bike and I rode around the neighborhood, and starting on Thursday and Friday, I went out and knocked on every door to collect for that week. All right? Kids don't have that opportunity anymore. One of the few they have is working at a fast food outlet. And I remember, it's funny, there's a great little store up in Port Jeff that's an ice cream shop. And I remember the guy saying, he said, when I see a young kid coming in to apply for the job and they have experience at McDonald's, I grab them. He says, because McDonald's teaches them to get to work on time. They wear a uniform. They know there's a system and they know how to work because you have to work. So when I see a kid that has McDonald's experience, I'll hire that kid. I want that kid. All right? We're going to lose that. The minimum wage was never intended to support a family of four. It's there as a floor. Frankly, there shouldn't be a minimum wage anywhere if you believe in the free, if you believe in a pure labor market, free labor market. But where is the incentive now for people to work harder? If you raise that minimum wage, all right, now everyone who's $1 or $2 above that say, well, you now have to pay me more because I'm just, I'm only $1 more.
On the other side, what's the incentive to work when you can get welfare and almost do better
of
on welfare than working?
Well, of course. That's another
I
thing.
think where it is now is if you're on welfare, you get all the full benefits.
Well, the explosive growth in disability.
And right, or you go on disability. You say, I slipped in
Yeah.
in the store. Now you're better off than working for minimum wage.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
that's a problem too.
That's right. We are paying more people today not to work than at any point in our history, and that is not a good social trend. It just is not. So, yeah.
Well, Assemblyman, thank you very much for
Gary, thank you. I
taking the time, even with your
Yeah, this was
surgery.
fun.
It shows your dedication.
Thank you.
But
My voice lasted longer than I thought.
You did great.
Actually.
I'm Gary Jacobs, and again, thank you for joining us at Long Island Backstory. If you'd like to learn about more about Assemblyman Fitzpatrick, he's got a website that talks about all his issues. And if you're up in Albany, knock on his door. He's always welcome anywhere you are on Long Island. I know he's always one of the few people who will listen to you and also educate you on how Albany works, which is important.
Happy to speak to anybody. Room 458 in the Legislative Office Building in Albany.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you,
you
Gary.
very much.
They'll test you. Try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver, the one in control. Stand firm. Just wait. And move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
They told me a bottle couldn't dream. That I would never become a superhero. But I learned how to fly. Just to come back in a new disguise. And be the hero that I've always wanted to be.